Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 25.6 ADC tier list. So, if your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a lot of changes towards the ADC role this patch. In fact, we saw 4 direct buffs to Smolder, Kaiser, Lucian, and Jhin. We saw 5 direct nerfs to Draven, Ezreal, Caitlyn, Corki, and Jinx. A pretty big shift around. A lot more champions have become... a lot of the weaker champions have definitely benefited from this. And then some of the high end, which Riot wanted to kind of refresh the meta a bit, have been nerfed down. So let's get into it. The D tier is going to consist of 2 champions now, and that is Mel and Kalista. In the case of Mel, she is in a relatively weak spot just across all ranks. This pick has really been suffering ever since they did that follow-up change to kind of make her less frustrating to play against, but in turn kind of brought up new frustrations with the champion. I think the pick could probably do with some follow-up work to really make her like kind of a solid option again. Luden's being buffed, I still think, is one of the big things at the moment. Right now, though, she is going to be buffed in 25.7 and is still suffering on the live patch, so not a pick I would recommend. In the case of Kalista, she's just a very hard champion to pilot, probably the hardest ADC in my opinion to really get huge amounts of value out of. She is an early game skewed elite kind of support dependent pick which wants specific pairings to really get the most out of the champion. A champion which I would just never really recommend for like average ranks in solo queue. If you're comfortable on it and you're playing like in elite, you're playing master plus, then Kalista can be a good option. For average play, definitely a pick I won't recommend. Moving on to the C tier, then we're going to lead off with Samira, who benefited from her buffs not too long ago. She had the E duration extended from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. It helped her. It allows her to obviously trade better, siege better, combo a bit more efficiently. She still has issues, like the champion only really shines when like very aggressively ahead. She doesn't have quite as much levers as someone like Draven does at the moment. Draven I do also have within the C tier. I think Draven is also a very hard to pilot champion, requires very good like early aggression to get a lot of value out of a pick. He also got nerfed this patch, but in the case of Samira, she's very one-dimensional in her build. You basically don't see anything other than the standard collector, i.e. shield bow, LDR, BT, 5-item core. There's just not enough build variety, and if you're ever falling behind, you really do struggle quite a bit on this champion. In case of Draven, his passive got nerfed this patch. It was very minor, doesn't really shift him a huge amount. He's still a very aggressively elite skewed pick, still an early game champion. Those traditionally absorb a lot of ban rate. It's why like Corki, Draven, Kalista all tend to be a bit more elite skewed and a bit more ban rate eating heavy champions. Moving up is Kaiser. She sits towards the high end of the C tier now. The buffs were nice. I would recommend trying things like you have 3 different options. You can go Krakenser, you can go Static, or you can go Yuntals. We've seen some like IE variations on Kaiser. I'm not so sold on the IE build as being like the mandatory way of playing her. I think you should primarily just be playing the standard like on hit AP variant, where you're going like Static, Ginsu, Nasha, and what's like your 3-item core. It still seems to be one of her most performant options, but she got buffed and she benefited from it, so she sits towards the higher end of the C tier now. The other remaining C tier picks are the likes of Brand, who is pretty much locked to Nami at the moment. Outside of that pairing, he really doesn't perform that well. The buffs he is receiving, 25.7, are directed towards jungle Brand, which is unfortunate because Brand across support, like bot lane and mid lane, is underperforming. And for the elo bracket where he should be the most performant as a pick, he's really just not performing that well at the moment. Felios is a very hard champion to play, but has a very high skill ceiling. If you can master a Felios, this champion prints damage. He can do so much. He scales really well. He obviously doesn't have the mobility of a lot of marksmen, but if you can just become the turret and you can space effectively, this champion does print damage. He's just hard to pilot, and that is one of the prohibiting factors from moving him up the tier list. Moving up from the C tier, actually one champion moving down is Ezreal. Ezreal took a pretty big hit in armor growth this patch. I believe it went from 4.8 to 4.2, which is meaningful. The champion obviously wants base stats to like really function as a pick. Most champions in the game do, but yeah, losing armor does make him squishy into some of these some of these like bot lanes, and then obviously later on into the game, if you don't have as much armor, you're more vulnerable to the likes of assassins. It does encourage building something like a Frozen Heart later onto a build. If you lose that armor, you want to get it back through items which you purchase, but obviously you're staying with the 3-item core traditionally of the Trinity, Manamune, like Shojin, and then like Shroud's Grudge tends to be pretty popular on him as an option. So not really that kind of like build diversity, but yeah, Ezreal still a very mechanical champion. If you can pilot him well, he can be an incredible pick. He's just weaker now, and not so much of a pick I would really recommend unless you've already put a lot of time into the champion. Moving up then, we have Lucian, who really benefited from his buffs. This pick gained 3 seconds worth of CD on like first point in E. Obviously, it's still the same at the full rank of the cooldown, but it's really nice for him. It does to an extent alleviate the need to max E second. I believe you are still maxing E second though. I haven't quite looked at the numbers for E compared to W max second as an option, but yeah, he's obviously benefited from it. It's a buff which stays until like level 13, like you're getting like value out of it, so meaningful for Lucian, for a champion which wants to be strong during the early to mid game to really get a lot of value out of the pick. The other pick moving up is Smolder. Smolder really benefited from his changes this patch. But just being able to have access to a bit more damage was very nice for him. Does elevate him from like a D tier pick to a B tier pick. Bot lane now looks like a pretty solid role for him. He still underperforms in solo lane, so I would recommend taking him here if you do enjoy playing the champion. Lux could probably be dropped down to the C tier. She's kind of like hanging on as a B tier option. There's not enough of her. Actually, I'll drop her down to the C tier. She's still a decent pick. Like if you're comfortable playing Lux as a bot laner, then you can still play her. She is mostly played by OTPs though. That is just the pick, how it functions. If you haven't put a lot of time into Lux, you'll probably struggle compared to like the more traditional marksman, as playing a mage obviously is a different thing to just playing a traditional option like your ADCs, like your Jinxes and your Caitlyn's, for example. So Lux, yeah, I'm going to drop her down to the C tier, but if you can get value out of a champion, she can still be really good. She just wants to snowball quite aggressively to be able to like use that gold. Veigar and Ziggs. In the case of Ziggs, obviously he got nerfed towards the end of last season. He's been doing alright since then. He's a good siege option which has a lot of range and can clear waves from quite a distance. That is kind of the strengths of the champion. In the case of Veigar, he's incredibly low skewed, but if you can get access to like level 13, he can be a really powerful champion. You will just struggle during the early laning phase. That is one of the biggest vulnerabilities of this pick. The likes of Xayah is alright, not she's obviously counter-pick dependent. She is a champion you can never really blind and get away with it because you will just be punished for doing things like that. Other champions will push you out of lane, and if you don't have a good and if it isn't a good game for the champion, like we don't have a lot of dive and you can't really get much use out of your ultimate and your self-peeling capabilities, then she'll really underperform quite heavily within the game. The likes of Zeri also sit towards the low end of the B tier at the moment. Benefited from direct changes to Yuumi, that also benefited from direct buffs to Yuntowers, but hasn't quite found herself in good enough of a spot to kind of promote to like behind the B tier towards the A tier. She still does underperform compared to other options at the moment. Hui got over nerfed, which is unfortunate. He's still I would argue, better bot laner than he is a mid laner. A lot of mages do tend to traditionally find that, where they can just wave clear, kind of avoid the whole like laning phase thing. Whole laning phase like ordeal where you're trading back and forward, and they can scale up, get their items, and pair really nicely with like supports. When they have like the consistency in landing their spells, that can be a really big value point of these champions. In Hui's case, he lost a lot of chip damage and it did hurt him, so I have dropped him down to the B tier at the moment. Varus, still the premier pick for competitive, still a really good elite pick. Doesn't tend to perform as well for average play. Obviously, he relies a lot more on setup, being given time to kind of lay down his poke if you are playing the poke build, and that tends to not be as valuable, or it's still a very valuable thing in low elo, but people won't play around it as effectively, meaning the champion traditionally loses value when played in this environment. Corki, I'm going to drop down to the top of the B tier. He lost 3 base armor. 3 base armor, a champion like Corki is very meaningful. He will die quicker in trades, and that will reduce his ability to snowball, output damage within the game, and yeah, the champion is weaker from it. He's still very early game skewed, and he will still eat a lot of ban rate and be perceived as very strong. Early game champions always have that going for them, but it's definitely weaker with that kind of a nerf being directed at him. Caitlyn. So Caitlyn, I'm gonna leave within the A tier at the moment. The champion's definitely weaker, not substantially weaker to the point where she would be dropped down to the B tier, but weaker that she will be dropped down to the lower end of the A tier. She, if you give her gold, is still an incredibly powerful ADC, can still be really oppressive in lane. It just reduced the amount of cases where you are just being one shot by Caitlyn, but losing trap damage is meaningful in that regard, and yeah, she drops towards the lower end of the A tier now. In the case of Twitch, he lost a lot of power when Axiom Arcanist got changed on him and then nerfed directly. He now sits towards the low end of the A tier as well. He's still a very good solo queue pick, kind of akin to Vayne. Vayne is a very good mid-elo pick. If you can get resources on her, people won't punish you as effectively during laning phase. You scale incredibly well. This champion can still have insane amounts of value within the game. Karthus, Victor, Swain are all like my AP options here. In the case of Victor, I'd say he's probably the weakest of the three. He's a good mid to bot lane flex option. He spikes incredibly well in the mid game, has great wave clear accessibility, can be a really solid bot laner in that space. In the case of Karthus, he is incredibly unpopular to the point where you could probably just remove him from the bot lane tier list. Like, he's half as popular as like Lux, for example, who is already a very unpopular champion, but his damage, his ultimate like global presence is amazing. It just gives him so much value, and it's very much a deserving factor for putting him in the A tier. Case of Swain, he's incredibly comp dependent, but if you're playing into a short range composition with lots of melee, low damage champions, he is one of the best picks within the game, and definitely a champion I would recommend trying in those kind of scenarios. In the case of Seraphine, she sits towards the high end of the A tier, kind of separated. I think the buffs to Seraphine really helped her, allows her to wave clear more effectively, and for a champion which is already a really good jack of all trades kind of pick, she really, benefited from that, just being given access to a bit more damage. She has heals, shields, crowd control, like self-healing tools, an incredibly powerful ultimate, and it gives her a lot of value as a bot laner. In the case of Tristana, she sits towards the high end of the A tier, probably the closest towards the S tier at the moment. She is performing incredibly well with the like gradual shift over to Unitels and IE, being able to output so much damage. She's really found her footing as a good bot laner at the moment. Same goes for Jhin. In the case of Jhin, he got buffed, but people have like picked him back up again, and he's performing really well at the moment. The access to a bit more damage has really helped him, and now allows him to be a bit more threat, scale even better, and a very deserving A tier pick at the moment. Some of the lower down A tier picks include Sivir and Ashe. I probably overrated these champions slightly. I think they sit towards the lower end of the A tier, or like mid to low end of the A tier now. Ashe obviously got buffed and then had some of that buff taken away from her because they went slightly overboard. She's still doing a lot better and is still a very good utility option, but she's just not going to output as much damage as some of the other marksmen here, and I would recommend opting into something with a bit more damage, especially lower down when you want a bit more agency within your games. In the case of Sivir, she's also a really easy champion to play with great wave clear, but her early game is still very weak, and you will be punished by lots of champions and oftentimes not be allowed to scale to those points. But if you can get to those points where you can just bounce out and do a huge amount of DPS, then Sivir is still an incredible option. For my S tier, I think Kog'Maw and Nyla are very niche picks, but incredibly powerful when given the right spots. In the case of Kog'Maw, I imagine he'll drop down to the A tier with the nerfs towards Lulu next patch, as that is one of his primary direct pairings. In the case of Nyla, though, she's also incredibly unpopular, one of the least popular ADCs in the game, but if you pair her with the right things and give her the right environment, she is an incredibly powerful marksman. Definitely a pick I would recommend learning if you enjoy that kind of playstyle. If you don't, she's not mandatory, but she's nice to just have within your arsenal. And then my three main picks here are Yasuo. who is doing incredibly well at the moment across 3 different roles. Mid, top, and bot lane Yasuo are all incredible picks. The change it towards his passive not too long ago really helped him. It's kind of enabled him to find his footing a lot more. He scales better, and for an already good early game champion, when you get access to like Bork, Shield Bow, IE, he's doing really well. He is a very performant pick, great into a lot of the range which the bot lane provides, great when paired with an ADC with a knock-up. I think Yasuo is in a very good spot at the moment. In the case of MF, she's very easy to play, a great caster marksman, a champion I would always recommend trying, especially within mid to low elo. Just with the ease of playing her, she does a huge amount of damage. Not quite the same level of DPS as some other picks, but her raw damage is very powerful. And then Jinx dropped down from the S plus tier to the S tier. She lost 10 or 15% AD ratio of her ultimate, combined with 25 flat damage at all ranks. Didn't do a huge amount. She's still an incredibly powerful pick, which if given 2-3 kills within the game will snowball and be an incredible DPS option. I do think she has vulnerabilities, obviously a lack of mobility, and can be punished in lane, but just getting ahead of the curve, this champion is still one of the best options within the game, and a pick I would always recommend playing, especially in the current state of the game. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.